Between 1949 and 1974, Professor Nicholas Pevsner, a German émigré art historian, toured the counties of England, compiling a 46-volume guide to every building he thought was of interest, from Stonehenge to Centre Point.
Well, that is a puzzle. Can you have an 1190-looking arch on capitals which look 1220?
Pevsner's guides, regularly updated, are unique. Nothing quite like them exist anywhere else in the world.
Well, now for Barrow. Mind that dog.
In this series, 6 contemporary travellers take to the road, with Pevsner's Buildings of England as their guide.
We're on the Orient Express, but we're not on our way to Venice. We're going to Southampton, the gateway to England. We've left dreary London behind. We're in Hampshire. I always feel a sense of anticipation as we come into the county. The light's brighter here, the air's cleaner. You feel as though life could be fun. But it's also a place of transit, a place through which you move, a place en route for somewhere else. This is a journey into the past, a journey into my past and the county where I grew up. Southampton is my hometown, and I come back here whenever I can. Its port has always been an exciting place to me. In the pre-jet age world, as many as 6 liners might be in dock. Architectural in their own right, there were floating hotels, symbols of an optimistic age. The ghosts of that age linger on.
The huge Southwestern House, originally the Southwestern Hotel, opened in 1872. The details are French Renaissance, laid on with a heavy hand.
The melodies that charmed us so.
This is where the boat train used to stop, allowing passengers to step into their hotel and await the departure of their luxury liners. The interior of this massive hotel was like a liner itself, with grand staircases and marble halls, and a lobby large enough for Tom Mix, the cowboy star, to ride his horse through.
It's time for little girls and boys to hurry home to bed. For there's a new day waiting just ahead. Life is sweet.
As the age of the ocean liner reached its glamorous peak, every celebrity of the period passed through this hotel. Up these stairs came Noel Coward, Haile Selassie, Mary Pickford, Winston Churchill. You still get a sense of their ghosts in these rooms. Somewhere in the distance is a tinkling piano and the chink of a cocktail glass.
Oh, let's creep away from the day, for the party's over now.
It was a sprawling warren of a place. Here, high up in the eaves of the roof, the bare bones of the building are visible, and a glimpse of the way the other half lived. It's a hot and airless place, this. It's claustrophobic. It's not decorated, it doesn't feel grand. It's not like what we saw downstairs. It's not full of marble and gilt. It's bare brick and bare boards. It feels like you're enclosed. And it's not meant to feel grand because this is where the manservants and the maids of the masters below stayed. They're almost stabled overnight. And these rooms are tiny, they're little cells. It's almost as though they're already on board ship. These are like ship's timbers. And in fact, the windows even are shaped like portholes. And it would have been through one of those windows in 1912 that some chap would have looked and seen the Titanic ready to embark.
Ocean Terminal by C.B. Dromgoole. When built, it was a great innovation, since it provided facilities for ocean passengers on landing to a reasonable standard of comfort.
Ocean Terminal was demolished in 1983. Its reincarnation is the new art house cinema, Harbour Lights, built in 1994. Sophisticated, aerodynamic, it's a prow about to break the water in these reclaimed docks. At night, it glimmers, reflected in the water, almost afloat. Hi, Mum.
Have that.
I come from Sholing, a typical Southampton suburb. These streets have grown up any which way, without rhyme or reason. Yet you can turn a corner and enter a different world. On my doorstep is an ordered, utopian version of suburbia. A model village designed by an architectural visionary. Herbert Collins, the son of a builder, isn't very well known outside Southampton. But in the 1920s and 30s, inspired by the Garden City movement, he built a series of estates at Highfield. They have a very village feel. Manicured lawns, neatly kept gardens, beautiful details. Every house is different. It's idiosyncratic architecture. And there's a sense of a suburban dream being realised here. And indeed, in 1945, troops serving in Egypt were shown photographs of Collins' houses as examples of the houses to which they might return, homes for heroes.
This is the sort of suburban development which set the pattern in better council housing estates for about 10 years after the Second World War.
This is a private estate. The regulations state that you're not allowed to hang your washing out after midday or paint your front door any colour but white.
I love my front door.
Do you?
And I like the bit at the top too.
Yeah, it's quite Georgian, isn't it?
That's
Looking
quite right.
Jenny Shipwright has lived here since the 1950s.
Very nice front door. This is basically as it was when we came to live here over 40 years ago.
40 years ago?
Obviously, there weren't any of the... We didn't have a fridge, didn't have a dishwasher,
No.
a washing machine.
I love these dressers.
Yes. This is something which is very useful too. The centre bit sort of moves.
Excellent.
I won't move it too far, I might
No,
get it back
no,
again.
quite.
And two things which I don't know that I could live without. These two bits that pull
That's
out.
wonderful.
And in some of his later houses, he actually put in an ironing board.
In the 60s and 70s, when I was growing up here, Much of the city was still bomb sites. It had been the third most bombed city in the country. To me, it was a bland provincial town, a place from which to rebel. I became Southampton's first punk, worked in Virgin Records as a punk DJ, and managed my sister's group, the Catholic Girls. But even anarchists have to acknowledge the past. Within spitting distance of Sholing suburbia, brutalist tower blocks give way abruptly to the eastern edge of Southampton Water. The strange contrast of the city and its urban overspill create bizarre paradoxes which have always fascinated me. In the semi-rural zone, where the city merges into the country, you can still find relics of the past. I've always been inspired by the spirit of places and the people who lived in them. I want to discover why they were built or why they were destroyed.
Netley Abbey was a Cistercian house. Monks came from Beaulieu and moved in 1239. In 1251, Henry III declared himself patron of the abbey, and his name appears at the base of the northeast crossing tower.
The abbey hasn't always looked as tidy as this. After its dissolution in 1536, it gradually fell into disuse. Neglected and forgotten, it became a mysterious, romantic place. By the 18th century, Netley's ruins had become completely overgrown. Huge trees grew out through the nave. It looked picturesque, and artists and writers like John Constable, Horace Walpole and Thomas Gray visited it. Netley had become the focus for a new craze, the 18th century version of punk, Gothic. There were tours of the ruins by moonlight. Young ladies in thin muslin dresses would affect to faint away with the sublime majesty of it all. In fact, Netley had reinvented itself as a Gothic theme park. It was a real-life version of Jane Austen's Northanger Abbey. This new cult created its own mythical version of the past, full of medieval fantasies, pagan notions, and morbid obsessions. Ideas as decadent and as shocking to parents as punk was in my day. For Pevsner, the experience of Netley should be academic, instructive, but I don't react to buildings in that way. I don't know if anyone really does. He likes to look at it in a clinical, methodical manner, but he doesn't see the history of the place. He doesn't see it peopled. In my imagination, I see this building peopled with its monks or its 18th century Gothics. But for Pevsner, that's a sentimental aberration in a way. It's a little English eccentricity.
Royal Victoria Hospital, a monster of a building 1,424 feet long. Built in 1856 to 63 as the main military hospital of Great Britain, on a site facing Southampton Water. The skyline is distinctly romantic, with the rhythm of towers, turrets, cupolas, and central dome rising above the trees, which hide the main bulk of the buildings.
These corridors were once filled with the casualties of 100 years of war. Brought here from around the empire, their often terrible injuries were treated by an army of doctors and nurses. Thousands of men lived and died here. Royal Victoria Hospital, the military hospital at Netley, stretched for a quarter of a mile from one end to the other. Its corridors were so long and so wide that during the Second World War, American GIs drove their jeeps from one end to the other. Now it's gone. All that's left is its chapel, standing like a broken tooth. The hospital was a town in itself. It spread over a 200-acre site with its own railway station, reservoir and gasworks. Like a phantom limb after amputation, the building's presence is still felt. The spirits of Wilfred Owen and Siegfried Sassoon, both of whom passed through this place, haunt these fields and woods. One section of the hospital survived demolition. Its military asylum, the first of its kind, and known by the sinister name of D Block. It's now the headquarters for the Hampshire Constabulary. But this is where some of the most awful casualties of war were treated, those suffering from shell shock. These men were subjected to sometimes crude medical experiments, although their doctors claimed miracle cures. The building is institutional, fortified. It's charged with the trauma of the First World War, what was, in effect, the British Holocaust. The memory of the First World War lingers in Hampshire. The county is full of memorials to it. This is one which I've never been to before.
Sandham Memorial Chapel was commissioned to allow Stanley Spencer to paint the cycle he was working on, and also to be a memorial to Lieutenant H.W. Sandham, who had died from an illness contracted in the war in Macedonia.
The artist, Stanley Spencer, spent 5 years painting this unique series based on his personal experience as a medical orderly during the war. The figures are extraordinary. You don't look at them from a normal angle. It's all as though you're seeing them from some space removed. And it's, I think, what's most remarkable about it, these are ordinary people. These aren't They're not generals. They're not the stuff of usual war memorials. They're not in heroic poses. They're doing ordinary things. Quite often in a way which almost looks as though we shouldn't be seeing them doing it. It's this strange thing here, which are they mosquito nets, or are they people showering? I mean, are those men undressing underneath it? And they're counterpointed down here by obviously a hospital bed and a cage over someone's legs, which are obviously very sensitive. I mean, there's something happened there. There's a man here who looks as though he's been burned or something. I mean, what's happened here? And yet you've got a sort of fantastic sort of Edwardian wallpaper behind. And this hospital scene, must have been very similar to a scene at Netley with the patients in their blue pyjamas. And what are they doing? They're making sandwiches, spreading raspberry or strawberry jam on stacks of bread. That's what Spencer is recording here, is the fact that war is about the ordinary people being made to do what is in essence the work of servants in a way. I mean, a lot of these men would have been servants back home. And here they're doing the same sort of work. They're polishing, they're scrubbing, they're looking after horses, they're digging. But the most extraordinary thing, which you sort of almost come to last in a way, because you sort of back away from it, because I think almost I'm scared of it, because when you walk in, you know that at the end here at the altar are these crosses. That's where the death of war is, represented by Spencer with these crosses just laying higgledy-piggledy any which way, being made by men, are they? Or are they being broken by men? They're laying on horses, they're tangled in the crosses. And then you start to realise it's a resurrection. It's a Spencer resurrection scene. But is it, where's Christ? There is a Christ figure there, is there? I can't tell. Is this what is promised? You know, is this a utopia? Is this the utopia that was promised after the war, which never actually came? I find it incredibly moving.
Winchester is the England men were fighting for, the ancient capital of its heartland.
Winchester Cathedral, with its 556-foot external length, is the longest in England and in Europe. The building is largely of stone from the Isle of Wight.
The cathedral looks solid enough, but appearances can be deceptive. Just as Manhattan is built on rock and London on clay, so Winchester, like Venice, floats on water. If it were to dry up, the city would subside. During the Middle Ages, pilgrims came here to worship at the tomb of St. Swithin, the patron saint of rain. And underneath his shrine, deep beneath the cathedral, you can feel how close the water table really is. Throughout the winter months, the cathedral vaults are flooded, sometimes with several feet of water. And when they flood, Anthony Gormley's lead statue is mysteriously suspended, a male lady in the lake, a reflection of the Celtic belief in water gods. There's a sense of something more ancient than even this building here. Perhaps a memory of an earlier site of worship, of a pre-Christian age. This is the oldest part of the cathedral, a place where pilgrims were given shelter.
It's cold in here. We're underneath the cathedral. Hundreds of tons of masonry above us. It's like a cave. It's also a holy place. It's like a sepulchre. And it's full of bits of masonry. It's a bit like an ecclesiastical version of your attic. It's the lost heart of the cathedral. It's where its deposed saints were put after the Reformation. And you do feel that building above you. Although everything above is ornate and Gothic and quite lavish, really, in a way, down here this is the simple, this is the minimal face of early medieval architecture. You can imagine the pilgrims who used to come here really at the end of their journey and feeling as though they'd achieved what they'd set out to achieve. They'd come to worship at the shrine of St. Swithin, and I think you feel St. Swithin's watery spirit here.
On Sunday mornings, our family would often drive to the nearby riverside village of Burselden. It's a quaint, ornamental place, but hidden behind a bland brick wall, quite unexpected, there's a building which has a particular significance for me.
The Chapel of Our Lady of the Rosary, Roman Catholic. Built in 1906 by a local leading light, Mrs. Shaw Story, and furnished to embarrassing richness with continental fittings, mostly wooden, mostly Baroque, mostly German.
I've been coming to Mass here since I was a child, and it's always struck me as being a strange place, a secretive place. You have to come downstairs to go into it. It seems to be hidden in the ground. It's almost subversive in a way. There's a sense that Catholicism is something which is secret. The high wall outside was extended because the villagers were anti-Catholic and they used to throw stones in at the chapel and break the windows. Mrs. Shaw Story made this chapel out of a ballroom. She was a short, dumpy lady. She wasn't into dancing. She didn't want a ballroom. She was a convert to Catholicism. So she made this fantastic chapel, filling it with these extraordinary pieces of woodwork and statues. And what this place is to me, in a way, because it's so full of the opulent continental fittings of a Catholic chapel, it seems to represent to me something of the Catholic heritage which we English Catholics have been denied for 500 years.
Burselden, on the River Hamble, was a place where men of war were built. Now it's a maritime mecca, Hampshire's version of Saint-Tropez.
By the riverside is the Jolly Sailor, a pleasant 18th century inn from which there is a view to the open-work concrete interwar bridge.
You really get a sense of the water being here at Hamble. You feel happy here. Hampshire feels happy here. You know, people are on holiday. They come here for the weekends, they get in their boats and they go off down the river. And it's quite apposite that in the 80s, when things were looking quite gloomy, TV soap was based here. It was a sort of panacea to the terrible notion of unemployment, that you'd have a place where life could seem fun, where the possibility of escape was real.
No, it's no joke for a man like you being made redundant. No. I've been thinking, Tom, maybe you and I could solve each other's problems. Well, I'm not getting any younger. This yard could use some new blood. And a bit of capital inject. Suppose you wouldn't be interested. Here you could be master of your own little kingdom.
On the upper reaches of the Bewley River, deep in the heart of Hampshire's green darkness, nestles uncompromising architecture created by a 1960s mastermind. Basil Spence was the preeminent post-war architect famous for Coventry Cathedral. To some, he was Saint Basil, a genius. To others, he was an architectural autocrat.
Spence Cottage, Dock Lane, by Sir Basil Spence. Small, but powerful and resourceful. The house was built in 1960 to 61.
There's this beautiful, very 60s cadmium yellow.
Love the front door. It's great, isn't it?
And into, wow, a very large oak.
John Pardy, the architect restoring the building for the current owner, showed me round. He's a Spence enthusiast.
References are everywhere. We're in a sort of ship floating above the river, really. Timber structure.
The first floor is all timber with a deep cantilever along the whole riverfront, partly balcony, partly living room.
It is, you feel as though you're floating across the river, don't you? It's
Indeed.
that extraordinary relationship to the river. I mean, this incredible view.
Absolutely fabulous.
Yeah. And this fireplace, I mean,
Yeah.
I've never seen a, I mean, it doesn't look as though it's not. Where is it attached? How's that built?
Well, that's about 1.5 tons of concrete that's hung. So it doesn't get support from underneath. It's literally hung from the chimney.
That surface seems to me very characteristic of Spence.
Yes, it is. It looks like an elephant's back. It's bush-hammered concrete, so
Right.
it's cast and then hammered. So, into these little magic rooms.
It is. It's just like being on board a boat, isn't it?
Yes. Quite small, although probably the same size as the average double bedroom in today's housing. Very sensitive design.
There's a faint air of abandonment about the house, as if it's waiting to be woken up.
Tiny little, just like being on a yacht or a boat.
Or a sauna.
Top.
It's also
Yeah. Yeah. And there's a beautiful pentagonal-shaped swimming pool down there. And there are stories of people diving off the windowsill into the pool.
Spence was a 60s socialite, throwing swinging parties in his dream home. For all its modern reference points, this country retreat is very English, created by a dandy with a nice line in goatee beards and bow ties. For centuries, Hampshire's waterways have been the route for conquest and culture. Through Southampton Water, England and Englishness were exported around the globe. But it's also a way to leave England, to escape to a place where you really can be master of your own kingdom. The Isle of Wight floats at its mouth like a punctuation point on the coastline of England. To me, the island brings back memories of childhood holidays, picnics and sand castles. It's a colonial outpost of England, a place which is redolent of a bygone age.
Years after her accession to the throne, Queen Victoria married Prince Albert. They wanted a private house to be paid for by them. Something, as she wrote to King Leopold, quiet and retired. Prince Albert was his own designer, but he employed as builder, and no doubt to a certain degree also as architect, Thomas Cubitt.
Osborne House represents the optimistic high point of the 19th century, a specific moment in time. It has a quiet magnificence which almost glows.
This isn't what you'd expect from a Victorian interior. There aren't any gloomy Prussian portraits here. It's full of life, it's gilt, it's colourful. It was created by a glamorous young couple in the year of the Great Exhibition, 1851. It's almost as though they bought their furnishings and fittings from there, the Conran of their day. It's not inhibited, it's not the gloomy Victoriana of the later period. It feels full of life.
The view from Osborne was artfully contrived to resemble a bit of the Mediterranean transplanted to the Isle of Wight. The house sits jauntily on the island's shores, like a Regency villa, a Victorian version of the Brighton Pavilion. But with Albert's death in 1861, Osborne became a kind of mausoleum. The blinds were pulled down, and Victoria wore black for the rest of her life. The palace took on a darker air as Albert's rooms were shut up. Clinically depressed, the Queen became a recluse, living, it seemed, in a fantasy world of her own creation. Away from Osborne, history moved on. Victoria's kingdom became the largest empire the world had ever seen. And Osborne itself was extended to reflect this imperial expansion.
The Durbar wing was carried out under the supervision of Bairam Singh and John Lockwood Kipling, Rudyard Kipling's father.
We're in an audience chamber created for a queen who would never visit the country of which she was an empress. It's an extraordinarily ornate room. It drips with plasterwork. It hangs from the ceiling like stalactites or carved ivory. This is the complete manifestation of imperialism. It's filled with plunder from the empire, brought like offerings to the great White Queen. An extraordinary notion, this little woman who ruled over quite a lot of the world from this seaside house in the Isle of Wight. In a way, its extravagance is a symbol of the fact that the empire could go no further. It had reached a point, and the lavishness of this room is deeply symbolic of that, of the fact that what came after this was the modern world, that this was the last gasp of the 19th century.
At the southwesternmost tip of the island is West Wight, an island within an island, a strange, isolated area, a place of imagination. Here at Freshwater, a strain of Victorian eccentricity developed, presided over by Alfred Lord Tennyson, the poet laureate. These portraits were made by Tennyson's neighbour, Julia Margaret Cameron, in the greenhouse here at Dimbler Lodge. Cameron was rumoured to be Tennyson's lover. She shared his obsession with Arthurian myth and legend. Her photographs are darkly romantic, sometimes tinged with madness.
Alice Liddell, Alice in Wonderland, as a grown girl, still looking very innocent. And Tennyson and Hallam and people who came to this part of the Isle of Wight, Lewis Carroll visited here. We have a sense of a bohemian alternative court to Osborne. I mean, this is the pre-Raphaelite dream realised. These people dressing up all the time. Julia Margaret Cameron persuading the poet laureate to don extraordinary clothes. It's a bohemian place, a place where you could indulge in this new art, the black arts, because it stained your hands black. You have a sense of English eccentricity really bubbling up here in this strange little part of the Isle of Wight, cut off from everywhere else.
Cameron had a secret door built into her garden wall so that the poet could come and go without being observed.
Come up a long green tunnel on the remotest part of the Isle of Wight. We feel as though we're a long way from civilization. But there's a reminder at the top of this hill of Britain's oldest civilization. It's a Neolithic longstone. No one knows why it's here. It's an example of uncompromising structure, something which is in relation to its territory, to its terrain, but it also stands proud of it. Pevsner doesn't really get it, and in a way it's annoying to have him here, to have his voice in my ear, to have his estate agent speak, determining my travels, determining what I see. You can't describe a stone like this in architectural terms. It doesn't work in that way. It works in other ways. It works in emotional and historical ways. This stone's seen a lot. It's seen a lot of England's history. And it represents for me, in a way, the spirit of this part of Hampshire, a spirit which is eccentric and strange and mystical, and also a spirit of escape, of individuality, of being oneself, of escaping the rest of civilization. And I think if anywhere in this part of Hampshire is symbolic of that spirit, it's this stone.